Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the embroidered slippers of someone you definitely wouldn't want to be, a royal heir. That's right, you, with your fluffy pillow and cozy blanket, are about to become the next in line to a throne you didn't ask for. And let's just be real for a moment. You probably wouldn't survive this life. Not because of swords or poison, although those don't help, but because it's a constant, exhausting theater of expectations, boredom, and betrayal served with a side of fancy bread. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little kingdom reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells like warm beeswax and ink, and the velvet tapestries hanging around your gilded cradle flutter slightly in the draft. Outside your palace window, bells ring for your birth, although you won't remember them. And that's a pity, because they're probably the last sincere celebration you'll ever get. You're a baby, wrapped in linen so fine it feels like cloud skin, and your eyes don't yet know how to focus. But already, powerful men and women are discussing you with chilling seriousness, referring to you not as a person, but as the future, the line, the vessel of the realm. There's something deeply unnerving about being a vessel when you haven't even figured out how to control your own neck yet. Your wet nurse is selected for her good temperament, her peasant bones, and her docility. You'll never know her name, but she'll hold you more than your actual mother, whose time is spent in ceremonial posturing, hair braiding, and praying for sons in drafty chapels. You're the result of one of those prayers. You're also already a disappointment if you happen to come out the wrong gender, which in historical Europe at least meant anything but male. Sorry, you might think being born royal comes with freedom, but let's disabuse you of that fantasy right now. Your swaddling cloth is more of a silk straitjacket. From a moment you're laid in your gold-trimmed cradle, your life isn't really your own. You are now state property wrapped in lace. A servant wipes your chin while another logs the consistency of your last burp. Yes, really. Even your bodily functions are political data points. The astrologer casts your chart before you can form a word. He squints at the stars and mutters things like, "Mars ascends with trouble," while you kick aimlessly at the air and hiccup. You're oblivious, of course, but everyone around you treats your future as if it's already scripted. The king, that's your dad, technically, gazes down at you with a mix of affection and barely masked terror. He knows exactly what kind of hellish legacy you've just inherited, and he's secretly praying you don't turn out like his cousin, the one who mistook a bishop for a goose during a banquet and accidentally caused a war. Historians still debate whether that cousin was drunk, mad, or just very, very bored. Time moves slowly in the royal nursery, and your earliest memories are likely a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. The walls are padded not for safety, but to muffle sound so that your slumber won't be interrupted by the low groans of the kingdom outside. Courtiers tiptoe past your room, bowing slightly as if you can perceive them, which you can't, but they do it anyway. The pageantry begins before you've even cut your first tooth. And the cradle you sleep in, carved from elm and gilded with lion motifs, feels more like a display case than a bed. If you could talk, you'd ask for something simpler. A nice wool blanket, maybe a corner to drool in peace. But you are, unfortunately, not allowed the luxury of ordinary slobbering. If you so much as coo too loudly, a superstitious nurse may interpret it as a sign of vocal fortitude and proclaim that you'll be a fierce warrior someday. Spoiler, you might just be gassy. Even as an infant, your life is planned years ahead. There are already discussions about your betrothal. Yes, betrothal. While you're still figuring out which finger tastes the best, you have advisors, are negotiating whether you'll marry a Habsburg or someone from the French side, depending, of course, on the whims of alliances, dowries, and plagues. There's an eerie quiet to these conversations, as if no one dares to speak above a whisper around you. And really, who could blame them? You're not a child. You're an institution with chubby cheeks and soft fontanelles. There are records of royal babies being fitted for ceremonial robes before they could sit up. You'd think someone would step in and say, hey, maybe let the kid crawl before scheduling a coronation rehearsal. But no one steps in. They just have more lace. As you grow, slowly, awkwardly, and very publicly, your presence is used like a ceremonial chess piece. Your first steps are witnessed not by smiling parents, but by a circle of grim advisors scribbling notes and nodding with the gravity of astronomers watching a comet. One fact: King James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, was so coddled and managed as a royal infant that he never even crawled. He was carried until he walked, and many think it may have contributed to his lifelong awkwardness. You're headed down the same path. You won't climb trees, scrape your knees, or chase frogs. Instead, your early years are soaked in ritual and anxiety. You're taught that your body belongs to the state, and even your emotions are quietly discouraged. Crying too often is seen as weakness, smiling too often as frivolity. So you learn early how to smile politely without actually enjoying anything. A useful skill, honestly. And if you thought royal babyhood ended with time, it doesn't. It just evolves. You soon learn that your toys aren't really toys. They're hand-carved learning tools designed to teach you about war, politics, or Latin verbs. You're expected to parrot back phrases like dulce et decorum est pro patria mori before you can read. That means it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, which is an absolutely bonkers thing to teach a child holding a rattle shaped like a miniature mace. You'll attend your first formal audience still smelling faintly of milk and talcum, and be expected to bow correctly, speak clearly, and, most importantly, not fall asleep standing up. Again, most heirs don't make it through this phase without at least one very public yawn. It's a rite of passage. As the days pass, you become aware, somewhere deep in your little royal soul, that everyone's watching you, and not in a sweet, doting way, but more like hawks circling something shiny. Your smallest quirks become gossip fodder. Does the heir prefer the falcon puppet or the lion puppet? The lion, oh, how regal. Perhaps he has the makings of a warrior king. Or is it a preference for falcons, symbolizing cunning, speed, or perhaps a troubling fondness for the French? Every sneeze, every pout, every nap is analyzed with the intensity of a Cold War intelligence briefing. And you're just trying to figure out what to do with your hands. One of the strangest things is how lonely it all feels. Yes, you're surrounded by staff, but real affection is rare. You begin to notice how every smile is a little too polished, every hug a little too public. And every time you cry, someone recorded like a court stenographer writing a weather report. The heir cried twice before dawn, both times brief, no visible distress. You learn to cry quietly, not because you're strong, but because you sense that your emotions are inconvenient. You're not here to feel, you're here to represent. And representation means stillness. Even your name isn't entirely your own. It's chosen from a tight list of politically acceptable options. You might be George or Edward or Henry, or something equally regal and impossible to shorten into anything remotely fun. Forget Bobby or Max. You are His Royal Highness, and you will be addressed as such by everyone, including people you secretly wish would go away. You may get a nickname behind closed doors, something your wet nurse whispers while rocking you, but no one outside that nursery ever hears it. It's just one more piece of you quietly erased in favor of the image everyone else wants to project. As your little eyes adjust to the flickering torchlight and the soft shadows cast by heavy drapes, you realize, though you couldn't possibly articulate it yet, that your future has already been written in ink, wax, and the expectations of thousands. And you're still in diapers. The cradle creaks softly beneath you, echoing like a ship setting sail across a very still, very treacherous sea. Your feet still barely touch the ground, but already your world is shaped by velvet curtains, silent servants, and rules layered so thick they seem to press on your skin. The nursery, once a softly lit, muffled cocoon, is now more of a museum than a bedroom, and your toys are gradually replaced with stiff-backed chairs. Books you're told are appropriate for your station, and tiny slippers you're expected to wear whether or not they pinch your toes. Your days follow an absurdly strict rhythm. Wake, wash, dress, bow, sit, repeat. No one really asks what you like. They ask what befits you. Everything is designed not for your comfort, but for your conditioning. There's a governess now, imported from some obscure noble family, who speaks 4 languages and smiles as though she's hiding secrets in her teeth. She's the kind of woman who praises you with phrases like adequate poise today, and who considers the ability to sit perfectly still for an hour a noble trait. You want to run, to laugh, to roll down the long polished hallway carpets like they're hills, but you don't. You don't because the walls have ears, and also quite possibly gossiping portraits. Every face around you belongs to someone who either outranks you or desperately wishes they did. And even your most innocent movements are parsed as hints of your future temperament. One bored glance during a prayer might be seen as heresy. One giggle during a lecture, a national scandal in miniature. Historians still debate whether young Louis XIV once belched during a choir performance and was slapped so hard it left an imprint on his ego. It's likely exaggerated, but you wouldn't doubt it. Your own tutors wield canes that are mostly symbolic, but somehow still always within reach. The nursery transitions into the schoolroom as you grow, but the cage only shifts in shape. You move from embroidery hoops, yes, even you little prince, to scrolls of Latin and stiffly bound psalters. Your hands are guided carefully, your posture corrected constantly, your thoughts subtly curated by the selection of stories and saints you're allowed to read. Your instructors, meanwhile, come in a revolving door of robes and mustaches, each one more pompous than the last. One speaks only in riddles. Another insists you memorize entire family trees of people long dead and much disliked. You don't dare roll your eyes, though it becomes a personal pastime to mentally replace their powdered wigs with ridiculous things like cabbage leaves or bowls of porridge. Still, you nod along, repeat the names, the dates, the oaths. They teach you how to speak, but not how to be heard. They teach you how to command, but not how to connect. And even at this age, you begin to feel the divide forming between who you are and who you must appear to be. Your playtime is limited, supervised, and depressingly symbolic. You might be handed a carved knight and told to remember your future responsibilities, or presented with a wooden castle and asked to demonstrate military strategy, as though a child lobbing a block at a stuffed dragon is somehow preparing for statecraft. There are no birthday parties with jelly and streamers, only formal feasts with lukewarm meats and an audience that claps politely when you open your mouth to speak. And don't even think about climbing trees. Too dangerous. You might bruise your future. Your days are hemmed in by velvet ropes. Your emotions wrapped tight in ceremonial silk. Want to scream? Can't. Want to cry? Only if it's poetic. A single tear during a poetry recitation might earn praise. Anything more? Weakness. Indulgence. Undignified. Even your laughter must be rehearsed. There's a certain way to chuckle without seeming foolish, and you practice it in front of a mirror until it feels like part of your wardrobe. Try laughing sincerely, and the room turns colder. And then there's the food. It sounds luxurious, and in some ways it is, but it's also ceremonial, blandly safe, and eaten under scrutiny. You sit at a miniature version of a long banquet table, flanked by advisors and distant cousins who chew with the solemnity of monks. Forks weren't even a thing in some eras, which makes the entire experience messier than you'd expect. But regardless of century, your appetite is never yours alone. Every dish you eat is tasted first by a servant whose job it is to die for you. If need be, a deeply unsettling thought for a child, especially the first time the taster hesitates before sipping the wine. You spend the rest of the meal wondering whether that's just how his face looks or if your soup is secretly laced with treason. You learn to chew carefully, swallow slowly, and never, under any circumstances, say, "This tastes funny." People have been exiled for less. Even your bedroom is less of a refuge and more of a statement. The canopy above your bed weighs more than most livestock, embroidered with crests, lions, and ominous Latin phrases you haven't translated yet. The mattress is soft enough, but the bedding is stiff with ceremonial embroidery, and there's a fireplace that's mostly decorative, lit only when you've done something that pleases your tutors. It's cold, even under 3 blankets, and you sleep beneath portraits of ancestors who either died too young or lived too long. Some of them look like they're judging you. One of them definitely has a lazy eye that always seems to follow you across the room. You try not to look. When the wind howls through the window panes, it sounds like it's whispering secrets about what it really means to be next in line. You pull the covers over your ears and pretend not to hear. There are other children in the palace, but they're not quite friends. They're either distant cousins, political hostages, or glorified reflections of you, each one trying, subtly or not, to outshine you. Play becomes performance. A simple game of marbles turns into a study in diplomacy. Sharing a toy becomes a metaphor for treaties. And losing? Not an option. If you cry when someone else wins, you're spoiled. If you laugh too hard when you win, you're arrogant. The balance is delicate and exhausting. You learn to smile with your eyes, apologize like a prince, and always let the other child keep the toy when someone important is watching. Later, you can send a footman to retrieve it. You're taught that kindness is a useful strategy, not a virtue. There's a difference, apparently. Your emotions begin to fray, though you don't always notice it. They fray in quiet ways. You stop skipping down hallways. You learn to tuck your hands neatly in front of you when standing still. You start to speak less at meals, listening instead for what the adults don't say. There are whispers now, always just outside the room, about you, around you, never to you. Who are you most like? Your father, your grandfather, that great uncle who vanished on a pilgrimage and was never spoken of again. You don't know what they mean, not exactly, but you hear the tightness in their voices. They don't want another Charles. They don't want another Richard. You begin to worry you might accidentally become one of them just by blinking the wrong way. There's a particular day burned into your memory, though. A lesson in posture, 3 hours of it. You're told to stand straight, shoulders down, chin up, hands folded. You're praised when you do it without fidgeting. You're told this is how kings stand. Kings don't hunch. Kings don't slump. You're not told what to do if a king wants to lie down on the floor and scream into the carpet. But that's probably not regal. You don't ask. And while you're standing there, trying to imagine you're a statue and not a 9-year-old with a sore neck, one of your advisors chuckles softly and says, "You'll make a fine figurehead one day." You smile because it sounds like a compliment. You don't yet understand that figurehead means a puppet with a crown. Courts begin to appear, tiny rebellions. You start moving your dinner knife slightly to the left before eating. You pause a beat too long before bowing. You blink very slowly when someone praises you. These are your rebellions, as small and useless as they are. But they make you feel like a person, not a statue wrapped in brocade. You begin to write in the margins of your Latin textbooks. Strange little drawings. Faces. Ships. A monkey in a crown. One of your tutors notices, raises an eyebrow, and quietly replaces your quill with one that squeaks every time you use it, an irritatingly passive punishment. You pretend not to care. Somewhere between your 9th and 10th birthday, you begin to understand that your childhood isn't a chapter, it's a dress rehearsal. You're being watched, judged, compared, weighed. Every lesson is a test, every gesture a message, every silence an answer. The only privacy you find is in brief moments between dusk and sleep, when the castle is quiet and your breath fogs the window panes as you stare out across the darkened gardens. The moon looks free. The stars don't bow. And somewhere out there, you imagine, are children who sleep in straw beds and don't have to worry whether their posture implies weak leadership. You envy them just a little, even if they have to do chores. And still, the day begins again. Another carefully arranged morning, another round of bowing, nodding, memorizing, and smiling. You are the heir, and you're learning that being the heir means never being allowed to forget it. There comes a point, somewhere between your 10th and 12th birthday, when childhood officially gives up on you. Not because you're too old for play, but because play has become far too dangerous for someone expected to rule. You wake each day under a ceiling that doesn't just hang overhead, it looms. Your tutors no longer smile, and your lessons have gone from charming stories to bleak drills of duty, language, law, and military theory, all before your second cup of watered wine. From sunup to sundown, your time is no longer your own. It's carved up into rigid segments like a pie no one actually gets to eat. You begin with ancient languages, Latin, of course, the language of kings and dead popes, because apparently, knowing how to conjugate a verb from 2,000 years ago is essential to leadership. You learn to recite laws, lineage, the complete titles of at least 20 relatives you'll never meet, and how to read with one hand behind your back to discourage slouching. You practice your signature daily, not for fun, but so it's harder to forge, and you're reminded, softly, firmly, always, that one day this scribble might send men to war. No pressure. You're barely tall enough to reach the ink pot, but you're already expected to act like someone who understands land disputes, maritime jurisdiction, and what to do if your cousin dies suddenly in battle and someone blames you. Tutors parade in and out of your study chamber like birds through an open window, each one leaving behind an unpleasant odor and a long list of dates, diagrams, and concepts you're meant to memorize by candlelight. You ask questions, of course. Why do we call it the divine right? Did the peasants vote on that? But your curiosity is often met with a tight smile and the kind of silence that means we'll pretend you didn't say that. You are taught philosophy, but only the bits that support your future throne. You're introduced to Plato, though your tutor always skips over the parts where he questions rulers. You read Machiavelli in secret once, his words sharp and glittering like the edge of a well-polished blade, and you never mention it aloud, though one phrase sticks with you like a pebble in your shoe. It is better to be feared than loved. You chew on that for weeks, wondering if it's true, watching how the grown-ups around you flinch slightly when your father enters a room. You start to notice how no one laughs around him unless he laughs first. You start to understand that power isn't just about speeches and swords, it's about timing. Tone. Who blinks first? History books say leadership is noble. Your gut tells you it's mostly theater with better costumes and slightly worse lighting. One fact you're forced to absorb early. Emperor Charles V was so overwhelmed by the administrative nightmare of his vast empire that he retired and became a monk. Imagine that, ruling most of Europe and still deciding that the better deal was solitude and soup in a stone cell. You're starting to get it. But it's not just your mind that's under siege, it's your body too. You're woken early, often before dawn, and made to stretch and bow and learn the mechanics of graceful walking, sitting, standing. There's a whole segment of your day dedicated to posture correction. Yes, posture. Because apparently one hunched air can ruin an entire dynasty's reputation. Your instructors circle you like sharks in brocade, occasionally tapping your spine or chin with a ruler, reminding you to project authority with the neck. You wonder what that even means. You train with small swords too, foils at first, eventually steel, though everything is still wrapped in ceremony. You don't spar, you perform. Your swings must be elegant. Your stances must look good from an audience gallery. You're told again and again that your body is not yours, but the kingdom's, and must therefore move with dignity. But dignity is hard when you're sweating through 5 layers of linen, and your fencing instructor smells like a goat that lost a bet. Meals are brief, silent, and monitored for overindulgence. You begin to notice that your food is colder than everyone else's because your presence is announced first, your arrival delayed by ritual, and your seat positioned at the table's end, where drafts hit hardest. Every bite you take is observed. Your intake is quietly judged. Did you take too much bread? Too little venison? You once left a pea on your plate and overheard a steward whisper that perhaps your stomach was delicate. You make sure to eat every pea now. You're being built brick by invisible brick into a symbol. And symbols don't get to have food preferences, or opinions, or weak ankles. One particularly rainy day, when the gout-stricken baron tutoring you in heraldry sneezed into your sleeve and called a blessing, you quietly counted the cracks in the ceiling and tried to remember what grass smells like. You're told you're lucky, over and over. How fortunate you are to learn these things, to be given these lessons, these tools. But it never feels like luck. It feels like surveillance dressed in finery. You'd give anything to disappear into the kitchen and bake bread for a day, to get flour on your cheeks and eat something you made without someone first testing it for poison. You try once, just once, to slip away and join the stable boys to help brush down the horses. For your efforts, you're found within 20 minutes and scolded in 3 languages. Do you wish to be mistaken for a groom? Someone hisses. You're grounded, not to your room, but to a week of extra theology. You now associate the book of Leviticus with sadness and the faint scent of horses. One afternoon, a philosopher from the university is brought in to expand your mind. He's round and pale and speaks in gentle spirals, telling you that all knowledge leads back to the self. He asks you, "Who are you truly?" And you stare at him for a moment, then reply, "I'm the heir." He frowns, as though that wasn't the right answer. He tries again, "But who are you without your title?" You don't know what to say. He leaves without giving you any homework, which is suspicious. That night, you dream of yourself wearing a crown made of mirrors, every reflection warped. When you wake, you feel taller, but heavier too, like someone added a few invisible stones to your pockets. Around this time, your lessons begin to include subtler arts, diplomacy, courtly speech, theatrical flattery, as one instructor calls it. You learn how to compliment someone's hat without sounding sarcastic, how to deflect a question without seeming evasive, how to express disappointment using no actual words, just a sigh, a glance, a pause. You learn how to smile without joy. There's a debate about whether you should be taught music. Some believe it softens the mind. Others argue it builds discipline. Eventually, they settle on lute lessons, which are dull and finger-cramping and mostly serve as background noise during court dinners, where you're expected to strum softly while people pretend not to be plotting things over candied almonds. At one such dinner, your cousin begins describing a dream he had about you falling off a balcony. Everyone laughs, but you notice his father doesn't. You spend the rest of the meal gripping your goblet a little tighter and avoiding balconies. You also begin to receive lessons in history, real history, now, not just royal myths. But it's curated, of course. Your ancestors are always the heroes. Their enemies, conveniently foolish. The tales are told in a tone that suggests you are descended not from humans, but marble statues who bled glory. And yet, when you sneak a book from the restricted library, a tattered volume tucked behind some falconry manuals, you learn that one of your forebears once surrendered an entire city because he mistook a tactical retreat for a victory march. Historians still debate whether he misread the battle map or was just incredibly confident. You chuckle softly at the idea, but also take note. Confidence and ignorance often wear the same robes. All the while, your inner world becomes more and more complicated. You begin to keep a journal, not of feelings, those are dangerous, but of facts, oddities, little things you observe. The way the steward always licks his thumb before handing you parchment. The fact that your Latin tutor winces whenever someone mentions Naples. The way birds scatter before it rains, and how certain nobles always arrive together, even when they claim not to have spoken. You start connecting dots, learning the undercurrents. You realize your education isn't about learning what to think. It's about learning what not to say. And you start to understand this isn't just schooling. It's conditioning. You are being shaped to carry a burden so heavy, no one speaks its name aloud. You're being taught how to rule, but not how to live. And yet, as your lessons pile higher, your mind does sharpen. You begin to anticipate your tutor's questions. You argue a little more convincingly. You bow just so. You know when to nod, when to remain silent, and when to raise a carefully timed eyebrow. You're learning, but what you're learning is less about the world and more about how to survive it. By now, you've mastered the art of being watched, because that's really what most of your young life is about, isn't it? Not living, not learning, but performing. And nowhere is that more painfully clear than in a never-ending parade of ceremonies, all choreographed to the minute like some eternal, emotionally draining play where you're both the lead actor and the prop. You wake before the sun just to sit through a robe-fastening ritual that takes 3 grown men for safety pins and 1 terrified page boy. Your clothing alone is a diplomatic statement. Each stitch, each color, each embroidery choice carefully selected to appease someone, flatter someone, or make a quiet jab at someone else. Blue for loyalty, gold for divine favor. That itchy lace collar? A gift from a duchess who would faint dead away if she knew you think it smells like boiled cabbage. The day is just beginning, and already you are exhausted. The first ceremony is often a blessing or a mass or some ritual that involves kneeling on floors so cold and hard you start to lose feeling in your legs. It's important your handlers remind you that the people see you kneel. A ruler who kneels for God will not bend for man. One of them says, without any sense of irony. You wonder if your knees know they're part of the royal branding package. After the blessing comes the formal greeting, which is code for you standing in a room while minor nobles try not to insult you or each other. You're not allowed to fidget. You must bow exactly the right amount. Too much and you seem weak, too little and you seem arrogant. You must smile, but not in a way that shows too many teeth. You must nod, but only slightly. Too eager and you look desperate. It's a ridiculous dance, and you're still not sure what any of it achieves. Once, a lord complimented your posture and then tried to annex a province. Another time, you sneezed mid-greeting and rumor spread for a week that you had consumption. There's an official who stands nearby just to whisper the names and titles of the people you're meeting. Because frankly, no one should be expected to remember that many Hyacinths, Constances, or Henricuses. One of them smells like rose water and treachery. You shake his hand anyway. The worst, of course, are the banquets. Massive, glittering, headache-inducing affairs where everyone eats too much, drinks too much, and says too little. You're always seated at the end of a very long table, framed by candlelight and expectations, staring down courses that arrive in waves so slow they make erosion look efficient. The food is lavish, but somehow never satisfying. Quail eggs with pomegranate reduction, duck glazed in something that may or may not be wine, and desserts so rich they feel like personal attacks. You want bread and cheese, maybe an apple. Instead, you're forced to pretend to enjoy pickled oysters while your father discusses grain taxes with a man who smells like sheep and smugness. And you're not allowed to just be at the banquet. You're expected to be observed. Every mouthful, every lifted goblet, every blink is part of the pageantry. Someone once wrote a song about how you smiled after a toast. It became a minor folk hit in the countryside. You hadn't even meant to smile. It was gas. And oh, the dances. Dances so formal, they should come with instruction manuals and footnotes. You don't just dance for fun. You dance to prove your breeding. You spent hours learning the steps, the proper bow, the acceptable angle for eye contact, how to extend a hand just so, how to not collapse when your slipper catches the edge of a rug. Partners are chosen for you based on politics, alliances, and occasionally just to irritate someone's aunt. You're not sure which is worse, dancing with someone who clearly hates you, or someone who likes you a little too much. Either way, you're not allowed to express anything resembling opinion. If you sigh, it's interpreted as poetic melancholy. If you look confused, they say you're deep in thought. If you smile, it's a promising sign of fertility, and suddenly your handlers are whispering about betrothal. You're 12. You don't even like holding hands. Ceremonies come in all shapes and sizes. There's the annual falcon naming, which sounds thrilling but mostly involves standing in a field for 3 hours while elderly knights debate which bird looks most majestic. There's the Feast of St. Hubert, during which you must walk alongside a leashed stag while monks chant in Latin and try not to trip over their own robes. There's even the Laughing Parade, during which you are expected to enjoy yourself, publicly and visibly, while court jesters juggle and make off-color puns about trade tariffs. You once cracked a real laugh, just once, because someone's hat fell into the soup, and it was magnificent. Everyone cheered. The king was so delighted he made the jester a baron. The hat guy got exiled. You never laughed at another parade again. The ceremonies blur together after a while. Endless festivals, blessings, processions, and knighting events, each one a mixture of pageantry and barely veiled political maneuvering. You ride horses so groomed they gleam like statues, and sit on thrones so stiff your spine forgets what comfort feels like. During one event, you're expected to receive gifts from visiting dignitaries. You get a falcon, a jewel-encrusted dagger, and a scroll containing 300 lines of bad poetry. You thank them all equally, because that's what you've been taught. You wonder what would happen if you showed actual emotion, if you threw the scroll, refused the dagger, or asked if the falcon had a name. Probably a scandal, possibly a war, maybe just a very strongly worded letter from someone named Archduke Wilhelm. What no one tells you is that ceremonies are where you learn who your enemies are. Not because they insult you. No, they're far too polished for that. But because of the tiny things, the bow that lingers a beat too short, the toast that omits your name, the gift that's just a little too symbolic. One minor lord once presented you with a mirror framed in thorns. Everyone clapped. You smiled. But inside, you noted the message loud and clear. Beauty with pain, reflection with danger. It was a veiled threat or a really intense metaphor. Either way, you had it quietly removed. Your tutors congratulated you. You pretended to care. Later, you used the mirror to practice your diplomatic half-smile. It now hangs behind a curtain in your study. You still don't trust it. Sometimes, the ceremonies are absurd, like the annual tapestry inspection, where you're led through drafty halls to stare at 10-foot woven images of your ancestors doing heroic things. You nod. You observe. You make the occasional comment. Ah yes, the battle of the whatever. Your attendants nod approvingly. Very astute, Your Highness. The truth is, they all look the same. Horses, swords, banners, clouds. You once said, nice embroidery, and the Duchess of Lotfield fainted with joy. It was considered a major success. From then on, you used nice embroidery as your go-to praise, regardless of context. Once you said it about a sausage platter, no one blinked. You begin to understand that ceremonies are more than traditions. They're performances designed to reassure everyone that you are exactly what they need you to be. Strong but approachable, wise but humble, divine yet somehow relatable. It's an impossible tightrope. And the worst part is, it never ends. Even illness isn't an escape. If you get a fever, it becomes a ceremonial event. The kingdom prays for you. Candles are lit. Courtiers send pears and posies. You lie in bed sweating through your sheets while your physician mutters about humors, and everyone else debates whether your illness was symbolic, strategic, or the result of overindulging in gooseberries. Historians still debate whether Edward VI's fatal sickness was divine punishment or just really bad luck. You begin to suspect that everything in royal life is just someone else's opinion wrapped in velvet and shouted across a hall. Eventually, even your birthdays stop being fun. They become opportunities for alliances, announcements, and vaguely threatening songs composed in your honor. At your most recent one, A visiting prince sang a ballad about brotherhood between thrones, and then tried to duel your best friend for looking at his boots. You clapped politely. Your best friend apologized for existing. The cake was terrible. All icing, no joy. You spent the rest of the evening pretending to admire a gold-plated compass, while wondering if it pointed to freedom or just back to your room. And so, the ceremonies continue. One long, slow march of glimmering armor and polished speeches, of fake smiles and real tension, of being seen but never known. You become fluent in the language of gesture. A raised eyebrow means delay. A folded napkin means refusal. A hand on a goblet before the toast means you're about to be offered something you won't like. You become a master of standing without slouching, speaking without saying anything, smiling without hope. You're no longer just the air. You're a living symbol wrapped in velvet and protocols, moving through a world where even the air seems choreographed. You stopped asking why. You stopped counting the ceremonies. You just endure them, one bow, one smile, one awkward toast at a time. Because you are the air, and airs don't complain. They just perform. Eventually, the whispers begin, not about your childhood, your schooling, or even your ceremonial ability to eat a glazed partridge with one hand while maintaining eye contact across a 40-foot table, but about your future. Real whispers now, weighty ones, political ones. The word betrothal starts to surface more and more, and you notice how conversations suddenly stop when you enter a room. Advisors smile too widely. Your tutors bow a little lower. Everyone begins asking you questions that seem innocent enough. What do you think of the northern provinces? Or do you enjoy falconry? But you know they're not really about hobbies. They're about strategy, bloodlines, shipping routes, treaties, wheat yields. And somewhere between your 13th and 15th birthday, you are officially told, the search for your match has begun. It's as if you've become a fine horse, and your future is now a matter of pedigree and placement. The word love isn't even whispered. It's irrelevant, quaint, a word for peasants and poets. You are told you will marry someone who can strengthen the crown, not someone who makes you laugh, not someone who understands the specific way you hate parades. You will marry the person that makes the most sense on parchment. And that parchment has already been drawn up in triplicate, sealed, and delivered by a courier who never blinks. You see the first portrait of a potential match on a rainy afternoon. She's lovely, if you like paintings of slightly bored girls holding lilies. You nod politely. They ask if you approve. You have no idea what to say. You say, she seems serene. It's the safest word you can find. It's also the word everyone wanted to hear. There are toasts that evening. Your life has been half decided, and you haven't even hit your final growth spurt. The betrothal process is a strange theater all its own. You're not quite engaged, but you're not quite free either. You enter a kind of social purgatory where everything you say is weighed not just for how it reflects on you, but on the imaginary union of two families who haven't even met yet. The people around you begin making odd statements like the Duchess' cheekbones will blend well with your chin, and their family has a fine tradition of fertility, as if you're both breeding dogs and political treaties at the same time. You attend more court functions. You're encouraged to smile slightly more, bow slightly lower, brush up on the language your potential spouse might speak. You are reminded to be likable, but not too eager. Powerful, but not intimidating. Charming, but not foolish. Every word out of your mouth is measured like gold dust. You once make a slightly sarcastic joke about how your future bride might only be marrying you for the wine cellars. And 3 separate advisors write reports on emerging signs of cynicism. You learn to keep your sarcasm internal. Mostly, you eventually meet her, not in a garden, not in some romantic chamber filled with sunlight and music, but in a very large, very cold hall surrounded by 60 silent people pretending not to be listening. She is graceful, poised, and terrified. You are graceful, poised, and equally terrified. You make a comment about the tapestries. She responds with a compliment about your shoes. The entire hall collectively exhales, as if the survival of the realm depends on your ability to exchange pleasantries about floor decor. Over the next few weeks, you're made to stroll together through various manicure gardens while chaperones hover just far enough to pretend it's not awkward, but close enough to intervene if either of you attempts any unsanctioned conversation. You talk about the weather, the seasonal yield of the orchards, the intricacy of embroidery. You're both so carefully managed that you begin to feel like actors in a poorly funded historical drama. Once, in a burst of rebellion, you ask her what she actually likes to do. She pauses for a very long time, then whispers, "Ride fast and not be followed." You smile at her for real, and she almost laughs, but then someone coughs pointedly, and the moment vanishes like a coin in a fountain. Soon enough, there's a formal announcement. Trumpets, toasts, a speech you're handed 20 minutes before delivering, filled with words like honor, unity, and destiny. You read it carefully because you're not allowed to stumble. Somewhere during the fourth paragraph, your voice catches just slightly, your throat dry from nerves, and someone in the audience murmurs, "He's overcome with devotion." You're not. You're just tired. The celebrations last 3 days. There are feasts, poems, a song written in your honor that features an uncomfortable number of references to moonlight and purity. You dance, you bow, you lift a jeweled goblet and clink it with hers, and you do it all with a well-practiced expression of serene inevitability. The entire time, your mind drifts to the stables, or to the courtyard where you once watched two servants juggle apples while arguing about saints. That it felt more real than any of this. After the announcement, your life shifts again. You're no longer just the heir. You're the half of a monarch in waiting. Everything doubles. Your lessons, your appearances, your responsibilities. You're expected to give opinions now, though only the correct ones. When you're asked about border policies, you say something vague and noble. When asked about tariffs, you tilt your head and murmur about balance. You are praised for your insight, which is odd, because you don't really understand half of what you're saying. But you've learned how to sound like you do. You've developed a voice, calm, thoughtful, not too fast, with just a touch of weariness. People love it. They say it's kingly. They don't realize it's mostly boredom. Your advisors begin including you in council meetings. You sit silently for hours while men twice your age argue over maps and grain and treaties and land no one in the room has actually seen. You are occasionally asked for your view, and when you give it, they all nod as if you've said something profound, even if all you did was repeat the last person's suggestion using fewer syllables. The trick you've discovered is to pause before you speak. Let silence work for you. It makes people listen harder. You've also discovered that if you lower your voice slightly, people lean in, which makes them feel involved. You once suggested raising the vineyard tax by 1/10 just to see if anyone would push back. They didn't. In fact, they called it visionary. You've started writing down your more ridiculous ideas in a separate notebook just to track how many would pass unchallenged. You're up to 15. Meanwhile, your bride-to-be remains largely ceremonial. You see her at functions. You exchange practiced pleasantries. You hear about her preferences from her ladies-in-waiting, who slip notes to your own chambermaids. You once write her a poem out of boredom more than inspiration, and it ends up being read aloud during a feast. Everyone applauds. She gives you a small, stiff smile, and later sends you a perfectly embroidered handkerchief with your initials entwined with hers. You pin it to your inner sleeve like you're supposed to. It smells faintly of lavender and expectation. Somewhere during this period, you begin receiving instruction in bedchamber diplomacy. Yes, that's a thing. Delivered with great seriousness by an elderly bishop who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. You are told, in very formal language, what is expected of you on your wedding night, and how to conduct yourself with reverence and ceremony. It is possibly the most uncomfortable 40 minutes of your life. You nod. You do not ask questions. You pretend the floor is a portal you can disappear into. Later, Your valet leaves a small satchel of herbs on your pillow for vigor. You throw it out the window. It lands in a fountain. No one speaks of it again. In public, your betrothal becomes legend. Songs are sung. Poems are written. Coins are minted with your conjoined profiles. Children dress up as you and your intended at festivals. Your expressions on those coins are noble, serene, and completely false. You've never once looked like that. Your real face is hidden behind a wall of expectation and routine. But you don't protest. You've learned that protest only creates work. It's easier to perform. You smile. You nod. You look directly into the eyes of your future and try not to blink. Behind closed doors, though, you wonder, what if you weren't the heir? What if you'd been born second or third or to a tailor in the South? What would you have done with your days? Would you have traveled? Learned to paint? Open a bakery? The questions are dangerous, of course. Idle thoughts, but they come anyway, in the quiet hours when the castle is still and the only sound is your own breathing and the far-off bark of dogs in the village below. You clutch your pillow and imagine it's a horse saddle and that you're riding away, just for a day, just far enough to breathe something other than ceremonial air. But you don't leave. Of course you don't. You are the heir. You do what is required. You carry the name, the duty, the throne, not yet worn, but already heavy on your shoulders. And so you sleep, dreaming of simpler lives, while the kingdom dreams of you. By the time you reach your late teens, the idea of power begins to feel less like a future crown and more like a parasite, one that has curled itself into your spine and wrapped quietly around your lungs. You still smile in the corridors, bow in the throne room, and speak in those perfectly practiced tones that make old men feel reassured and younger men feel intimidated. But now the weight of it all presses differently. Heavier, closer. You've gone from student to shadow sovereign, the unofficial second heartbeat of the kingdom, present in every council chamber, every delicate negotiation, every silent stare exchange between ministers whose smiles are too sharp to be real. You're still officially the heir, but the truth is people have started looking at you like you're already halfway to ruling. Which means the mistakes count now. No more harmless missteps. Every hesitation is a weakness. Every expression, a signal. Every absence, an opportunity for someone else to step forward. And the palace, you thought you knew it, is changing too. Corridors you used to sneak down for stolen sips of cider are now patrolled. Servants who once smuggled you pastries now avert their eyes. Even your horse is groomed differently, as if the stable boys have been told your saddle now carries not just a future king, but an omen. The castle's air has thickened into something less breathable. The walls feel closer, the laughter quieter. You become hyper-aware of how your own footsteps echo, as if the stones themselves are taking notes. You're assigned a personal advisor, which is code for handler, though no one says it outright. He's a sharp-eyed man named Lucian, all dark silks and clipped sentences, who has mastered the art of saying nothing and making it sound important. He's never once raised his voice, and that somehow makes him more terrifying than the guards with axes. You are watched now, he tells you one morning as he adjusts the cuffs of your ceremonial doublet. Everything you do feeds a story. Best choose which one you'd like told. It's not advice, it's a warning. You begin to notice the small audience that follows you everywhere. Courtiers pretending to read, servants pretending to sweep, foreign dignitaries pretending they don't understand the language. Even when you think you're alone, you're not. You speak aloud in an empty hallway once, just once. And a week later, a noblewoman gives you a tapestry bearing the exact phrase you mutter to yourself in jest. Let the falcons fly and the fools fall. It hangs in her parlor now, apparently. Everyone thinks it's poetry. You were just talking about the weather. The diplomacy lessons become real. Not just theory now, but blood, land, and veiled threats wrapped in velvet tones. You attend tense dinners where entire territories hinge on the placement of cutlery and whether you lift your goblet before or after your host. You learn to recognize lies by the twitch of a lip, the pause before a toast, the way a name is mispronounced deliberately. At one feast, a duke you've only met twice offers a toast to a future free of shadows. It's a threat. Everyone knows it, but everyone claps anyway. You raise your goblet, tilt your head, and reply, "Then may your future be blinding." The toast makes its way into ballots. No one knows exactly what it meant, but it sounded like something a ruler would say. That's the trick you're realizing, sounding like you mean it even when you don't. Especially when you don't. Your father, the king, grows quieter. Not frail, not absent, just quieter. He speaks less at council, delegates more, looks at you more often, sometimes with approval, sometimes with something unreadable. You ask him questions, and he answers in riddles. You once asked him how he handled fear. He replied, "I named it loyalty and gave it a sword." You're still not sure what that means. He watches you now in court, as you sit beside him on a throne slightly lower than his. Your first time in that seat, your palms sweated so much you nearly ruined the armrest. Now they only sweat a little. Progress. At one council meeting, he gestures for you to speak in his place. You do. Your voice doesn't crack. A baron frowns during your speech, and Lucian appears at his side a week later with a gift of imported wine and a thinly veiled threat wrapped in compliments. The baron smiles more now. You're starting to understand the invisible knife edge this throne is carved from. Your friends, if you can still call them that, begin to change. The childhood companions you used to spar with, sneak bread with, and mock tutors behind tapestries would now look at you with too much formality, too much calculation. One begins addressing you only as your grace, even when you're alone. Another starts offering advice you didn't ask for. One day, a childhood friend who once taught you to fish accidentally bumps into you in the corridor and slips a note into your sleeve, warning you not to trust your chamberlain. You read it twice, burn it, and then spend the next week wondering if the warning was sincere or if he's the one you shouldn't trust. This is the game now. Trust becomes a luxury you can't afford, like warm baths or unguarded laughter. There's ceremonies, of course, but they feel different now. Not as performances, but as rites. Practice runs for the coronation you don't speak of, but everyone anticipates. You lead your first small procession during a harvest festival, and you're given the heavy ceremonial sword to carry at your side. It drags slightly as you walk. It wasn't made for someone your size, but you don't falter. Children cheer. Old women throw herbs at your feet. A man from the southern province kneels as you pass and presses a carved stone into your hand. For protection, he whispers. The next day, Lucian has the stone tested for poison. It's clean. You still keep it. Your rooms are moved to a new wing of the palace. Larger, colder, further from your old chambers. To prepare you, they say, the bed is too large. The fireplace too clean. The walls are lined with portraits of past monarchs, their eyes painted to follow you as you dress, think, sleep. You begin sleeping with a dagger tucked beneath your pillow, not because you're in danger necessarily, but because it helps you breathe, helps you remember that you're not just a performance in brocade. You're something else, too, something with edges. You begin traveling, occasionally short tours to nearby territories, festivals, ceremonies, diplomatic visits. They call it exposure, but it's more like being paraded. You wave. You speak. You kneel where expected and lift goblets on cue. But you also watch. You watch the people, the way they light up or don't at your presence, the way their eyes follow your entourage or avoid it. You see a girl selling roasted chestnuts who refuses to bow and later vanishes from a square. You see a boy kneel so hard his knees bleed, then ask if his taxes will go down. You have no answer. At night, you lie awake in foreign castles, under foreign tapestries, wondering what kind of ruler you'll be, what kind of ruler you're allowed to be. At a distant abbey, an old monk stops you and says, "A crown is not worn, it settles into the bones." He laughs afterward, so perhaps it was a joke, or perhaps not. You write it down anyway. Your journal is filled now with such fragments. Things people say, things they don't. Your own stray thoughts, half formed, half terrified. You write late into the night, listening to the crackle of the hearth and the occasional howl of wolves beyond the walls. One night, you write, they don't want a ruler. They want a story. You underline it twice. You are summoned one evening to your father's private chamber. No gatos, no baísos. Just him, the fire, and a silence that stretches like winter. He pours you wine and gestures to a chair. You sit. He speaks little. He doesn't talk about policy or power or even the throne. Instead, he tells you about a dream he had as a boy, of flying, of falling, of waking with the taste of iron in his mouth. I thought it meant I would be a warrior, he says, but it meant I would never rest. You don't speak. Neither does he. You sit in silence, the fire casting long shadows across the walls, until he nods once and dismisses you. The next day, he doesn't rise from morning court, and people begin to murmur. So you wait, you train, you lead, you nod at the appropriate moments, and push back where you must. You visit cities, shake hands, offer comforting words to people who've lost crops, lost children, lost hope. You do it all with the poise of someone who cannot afford a crack. You are the heir. You have been shaped, groomed, trimmed, and refined like a blade forged over years of pressure and fire. The time will come. Everyone feels it. You feel it. The crown inches closer, not yet yours, but hovering, watching. And you, for all your preparation, are still unsure whether to reach for it or run. The day your father dies, there is no grand trumpet, no flash of divine revelation, no choir of monks singing you into your future. Just a muffled knock at your door and a pale-faced advisor whispering the two words that end one life and redefine yours. It's time. You already know what that means, though your body lags behind the realization, as if some stubborn part of you refuses to stand. The air in your room thickens with expectation, the way heat rises before a storm. Outside, the bells begin to toll, low and deliberate, not for celebration, not for fear, but for inevitability. The palace becomes a different creature entirely. It stops being a place and becomes a mechanism, a series of gears clicking into motion, ancient protocols activating like clockwork. Servants appear out of nowhere, not speaking, only nodding. You're dressed without speaking a word. Morning black, thick and suffocating, with gold trim so you still look royal, because even grief must be beautiful when you're born to rule. As you're led through the great hall, you see faces you've known since childhood, now gazing at you with something between awe and apprehension. Their eyes ask a question you've been trained your whole life to answer. Are you ready? And the truth is, you're not. But you nod anyway. The ceremony that follows is called the presentation of the heir, though really, it's the unveiling of the replacement. Your father's body hasn't even cooled, but tradition demands continuity, not sentiment. You're paraded onto the palace balcony in full regalia, standing so still you might as well be a statue. Below, the crowd stretches like a sea of wool cloaks and weathered faces, each one looking up with a kind of hopeful fear that chills your bones. They chant your name, or at least the name they know, the name they've memorized. Not the boy who once climbed the Western Tower just to see what the sun looked like from the roof. Not the young man who once tried to escape a banquet through the wine cellar. No, they chant the title, the role, the legend in waiting. You want to say something profound, something that will echo through generations. But the words handed to you are dry, ceremonial, and painfully memorized. So you recite them, your voice echoing off stone walls and timbered homes, while part of you watches from somewhere far away, wondering how long this version of you will last. Your coronation comes swiftly, no time for grief, no pause for breath. The kingdom cannot risk a moment of visible weakness. So they crown you, not because you want it, but because they need it. The crown is heavier than you expected, Not just literally, though it does bite into your scalp, but symbolically. A circle of gold that somehow manages to feel like a shackle. You kneel before a bishop so old he wheezes in Latin, and his holy oil touches your forehead. You feel the full weight of 1,000 years pressed down on your bones. You are now the monarch, but you are also something far more dangerous, a symbol that cannot fail. People don't just look at you now, they read you. Every frown is a sign, every smile a signal. When you rise from your knees, the cheers from the crowd are deafening, but what you really hear is silence. The silence of no turning back. The silence of a life you didn't choose finally choosing you. Life as a ruler is not what anyone tells you. It's lonelier, quieter. Not because there are fewer people, but because none of them speak to you anymore. They speak to the throne. Even friends from your youth start treating you like a painting that might come to life if they say the right thing. Advisors bow lower. Nobles compliment your shoes with trembling reverence. A distant cousin brings you a jewel-encrusted quill and refers to it as fit for your divine hand. You'd laugh if it wouldn't start a war over respect. You try joking once, just once, at a council meeting, and your entire court spends a week arguing about whether it was satire, prophecy, or encoded insult. You develop a listening face, the one you wear when you're not really absorbing anything, just cataloging reactions. It's the same face they'll paint in portraits for years to come. Noble brow, thoughtful eyes, jawline slightly heroic. None of it feels real. You spend your days in meetings and your nights in silence. Endless meetings, grain supplies, tax policies, river floods, trade treaties, military inspections, endless discussions about the tone of letters to foreign courts. You don't speak first anymore, not because you don't know what to say, but because they need the illusion of collaboration. So you let them argue, debate, posture, and then you speak. Slowly, deliberately, like thunder after lightning. That's the trick now. Everything you say matters, but only if you make it look effortless. You must be decisive but calm, strong but benevolent, wise but relatable. You must be everything to everyone at all times. There is no rest from that, not even in your own head. Your bride becomes your queen. There's another ceremony. More gold, more silence. You sit beside her on matching thrones, both looking out at a world that now expects more from you than it gives. You talk in public often about harvest, peace, progress. In private, less. There's an understanding between you, unspoken but palpable. You both play your roles, because not playing them would break everything. Occasionally, when the moon is high and your guards are drunk on duty, she sneaks into your chamber barefoot. Not for love, not even really for comfort, just to breathe the same air as someone who knows the weight of pretending. Sometimes you talk about the sea. Sometimes you just sit in silence. It is somehow more intimate than anything the poets ever wrote about. Ruling is about compromise, you learn. Constant, grinding compromise. You give a little here to gain a little there. You let a cruel noble keep his land, so his soldiers stay loyal. You allow a tax to pass that you know will hurt farmers, just to secure a shipping deal that might save 10 villages next winter. You look into the eyes of petitioners and tell them, I will see to it, when you know full well the matter's already decided. You smile at your enemies and thank them for their service. Unite men who've plotted against you, because stripping them of power would make them martyrs. You're not just a ruler. You are a sculptor, chipping away at your own conscience for the sake of stability. You sleep less, eat less, trust no one, but your people call you wise, and your court calls you just. You have become what they need. Whether or not that's what you are doesn't matter anymore. You discover quickly that ruling also requires performance. Not just in court, but everywhere. You must be seen hunting, feasting, blessing, attending weddings and funerals, laughing with nobles, crying with commoners. You're paraded through cities on horseback, each appearance a reminder that the kingdom still breathes. You wave. You nod. You occasionally say things like, let us move forward together, and our unity is our strength. No one remembers what you said, only that you look like you meant it. Once, after a parade, you step out of your carriage to comfort a child who lost his father in a flood. He touches your hand and whispers, "Are you real?" You don't answer. You're not sure you are anymore. Occasionally, you visit the royal crypt. It's deep beneath the chapel, all stone and shadow, lined with the marble likenesses of those who came before you. You look at their faces, their carved crowns, their unreadable expressions, and wonder what they felt in this same moment. Did they doubt? Did they fear? Historians still debate whether your great-grandmother ruled with compassion or cold strategy. One scroll describes her as the people's mother. Another says she had her rivals drowned in the garden well. You look at her statue and see none of that. Just a woman in robes, carved into stillness. Will they argue about you, too, one day? Write books and ballads and contradictory letters? Will they remember your victories or your silences, your decrees or your smile, or just the weight you carried? And still, the world does not stop. Famine brushes one province. Rebellion flickers in another. A neighboring king sends a gift wrapped in a threat. You handle it all because you must. You wear the crown. You write the edicts. You sign the orders. Some nights, you wake in a cold sweat, the dream still echoing in your head. A dream where you're running barefoot through a field, no crown, no robes, just the wind and sky and the feeling that you're you again. But then the knocking starts. The council is waiting. The steward is bowing. The parchment is ready. And so you rise, wrap yourself in brocade, and become the monarch the world believes in. Because you have no other choice. Time passes differently now, measured less by days and more by decisions. Those you make, those you delay, and those that are made for you by forces older and heavier than your will. You become less a person and more a system, an institution wrapped in flesh and silk, moving through rooms lit by chandeliers you barely notice anymore, followed by the click of boots, the hush of whispers, and the scratch of quills copying your every thought into permanence. You no longer eat for hunger but for presence, no longer sleep for rest but for ritual, and each breath you take feels like something you owe to the concept of kingship itself. You begin to forget what silence sounds like, true silence, not the curated hush of tapestried corridors and respectful attendance, but the deep, untouched quiet of being alone without expectation. Sometimes you stand at your window in the early dawn, looking down at the courtyard where servants are already sweeping, where guards shift their weight and suppress yawns, and for a moment, just a moment, you imagine what it would feel like to not be recognized, to walk among them unnoticed, to breathe without an audience. But then the steward knocks, and the day begins. Ruling means constancy. It means you cannot fall ill, cannot be indecisive, cannot appear confused even when the world spins beneath your feet. You are the still point. You are the fire that must never flicker even when the wind howls. Your people do not want your truth, they want your certainty. And so, you get it to them. Every morning, you receive reports. Uprisings simmering like stew too long on the flame, border skirmishes whispered through coded messages, nobles vying for marriage alliances like wolves circling meat. You're told which smiles were false at last night's banquet, whose cousin was seen speaking too fondly with a rival faction, and which ambassador was likely sent as bait. You listen, you nod, you issue orders with calm, practiced confidence, even when part of you wonders if your commands will worsen things. You are the sovereign now. Your doubt is not permitted here. Once you thought ruling meant control. You now know it mostly means endurance. You're not steering the kingdom so much as keeping it from tearing itself apart. You are the needle and thread that must keep an old, fraying tapestry from unraveling in front of everyone. A warlord to the west begins pressing your borders. Claiming your crown lacks the legitimacy of the old bloodline. You summon your generals. You review maps, mark terrain, order scouts. But diplomacy must precede blades. So you write a letter so dense with grace and menace, it takes an entire afternoon to compose. It's a masterclass in veiled threats and performative goodwill. When it arrives, he laughs and sends back a box of spices and a note that says, "We eat well in the West." You respond not with steel, but with trade restrictions. A month later, his people riot for lack of grain. Power is patience, sometimes. Your court becomes a theater where every conversation is a script and everyone rehearses behind your back. You host lavish feasts to maintain morale and perception, but each one feels like a siege, except the enemy wears perfume and speaks in sonnets. A marquis presents you with a rare hawk during one of these events, and you smile, grateful only for the brief distraction of the bird's disinterest in you. The hawk knows nothing of court politics. You envy it. During these banquets, your queen plays her part with grace. You exchange carefully measured glances and touch hands, just enough to keep the poets inspired and the gossip columns fed. Behind closed doors, you speak more honestly now, though honesty comes in short, tired bursts. She once asked you if you ever imagined simply vanishing. You said yes. She said she already had, years ago. The two of you laughed, but not out of humor. Even your faith changes. Not your belief, necessarily, but the way you're expected to perform it. You're not allowed to pray like a man. You must pray like a monarch. Loudly, publicly, dressed in ceremonial robes that weigh more than some soldiers. In cathedrals lit by 1,000 candles, you bow and kneel and rise while choirs chant around you. You offer blessings to infants you'll never see again, to dying peasants who clutch your hand like a holy relic, to merchants who donate just enough gold to merit your glance. You're told it is sacred work. You sometimes wonder if it's all theater. Historians still argue over whether your grandfather believed in divine right or just used it as a political shield. You ask yourself the same question every morning, right before you put on the sapphire ring symbolizing your covenant with heaven. You begin to notice the way people age around you. The court changes. Old advisors die or retire, replaced by younger, hungrier ones who flatter more artfully and plot more quietly. The guards shift. New captains with sharper swords and less patience. Even your queen's ladies-in-waiting are gradually replaced, their laughter pitched differently, their bows a little deeper. You start to wonder if the version of you they've heard about is more myth than man. Do they believe you're stern, wise, merciful, tyrannical? It depends on the room. In one wing of the palace, you're a scholar king. In another, a bloodless manipulator. Somewhere else, you're the ghost of your father, still haunting the throne. You overhear someone refer to you once as the Stone King, a compliment meant to suggest strength and resolve. But all you can think about is how stone doesn't feel, doesn't bend, doesn't live. It just sits. And yet, amid the endless duty, there are rare moments of stillness. A garden walk at dusk when the roses bloom without knowing your name. A game of chess played without strategy, just for the sound of the pieces clicking against marble. A moment at the harbor where a gull lands beside you and stays. A letter from a village child thanking you for clean water. These moments don't last, but they keep you from becoming the very marble busts that line your hallways. You cherish them in secret, storing them away like precious coins under your pillow of burdens. You also begin preparing for the future, not just managing it, but shaping it. Your heir is a quiet child with sharp eyes and an even sharper memory. You see yourself in them, both the stiffness and the ache for freedom. You try to offer them guidance without passing along the same chains. You let them run through the palace, once in muddy boots. You tell them stories that don't end in war. You teach them how to listen, truly listen, not just wait for their turn to speak. You wonder if it will be enough. You wonder if they will hate you for the life you're training them to inherit. You don't say this out loud. Instead, you show them the stars one night and say, "Even kings are small beneath this sky." They nod. You don't know if they understand. You hope they never fully do. Diplomacy shifts again. A new alliance is proposed with a nation to the south, one that once sent assassins. Now they send silks, rare birds, and a proposal of marriage to your cousin. Your council is divided. You listen. You ask questions. You don't decide immediately. That is your power now. Not haste, but hesitation. The ability to wait just long enough that others reveal themselves. Eventually, you approve the alliance, with 3 revisions no one expected. Everyone calls it brilliant. You don't tell them it came to you during a night of insomnia while watching a candle burn itself into nothing. You start writing again, not proclamations, but thoughts. Private thoughts. A journal hidden behind a false panel in your study, filled with phrases like, "Does this path ever end?" And "Was he right about fear being the crown's true metal?" You find yourself quoting your father more now, and sometimes you swear you hear his voice in your head when you stand in the throne room. You remember his silence more than his words. You remember the weight of his hand on your shoulder. You remember that night by the fire when neither of you spoke, and somehow that said everything. And then one morning you wake before the sun and everything feels still. Not the heavy kind of stillness before storm, but the soft stillness of a page turning. You rise slowly, dress without assistance, walk the halls with bare feet. The guards do not stop you. You make your way to the highest tower, where the air is thinner, cleaner, and for a moment, the world is yours alone. You look out over the city, the smoke rising from chimneys, the clatter of carts just beginning their morning journeys. You take it all in, and for once, you're not thinking of taxes or treaties or threats. You are simply here, breathing, present. It will not last. The crown still calls. The kingdom still waits. But for now, for this one stolen morning, you are not a king. You're simply a man watching the world wake up. And that perhaps is enough. The years continue their slow, grinding march. Not in a blur, but in a strange sort of loop. Seasons arriving like familiar guests. Ceremonies returning like clockwork. The faces around you aging with uncanny symmetry. While you yourself become increasingly difficult to distinguish from the role you play. You don't notice the change at first. How your reflection begins to resemble the portraits in the hall more than the person you used to be. You simply wake one day, rub the sleep from your eyes, and see lines where there weren't lines, silver where there was once gold, and something in your posture, some imperceptible bend that was never there before. The courtiers still bow, the ministers still defer, the world still turns around your decisions. But beneath all that, you start to feel more like a relic being displayed than a ruler directing the course of history. You sit on a throne that has molded itself to your shape over the decades, and you begin to sense it no longer feels like a seat, but like an anchor. Still, you endure. You always endure. That's what was taught, wasn't it? Not to feel, not to falter, but to persist. But something inside you has started to whisper that maybe persistence and peace are not the same thing. And the whisper gets louder each time another letter arrives telling of a failed harvest. Another famine in a far-flung province. Another war you cannot fully stop, only redirect, like a river that will flood no matter how many stones you pile on its path. Your queen has changed too, not just in appearance, though age has drawn its signature across her brow and hands, but in presence. She is less a consort now and more a monument beside you, her silence meaningful, her few words treated like scripture. You speak less to one another, but the silence is not empty. It's filled with long years, shared decisions, and a quiet sort of understanding that needs no punctuation. When she smiles at you across the council chamber, it's not the smile of lovers or conspirators, but of two people who have climbed the same mountain and know every scar and cramp it left behind. Your children, because yes, eventually there were children, have grown. One is a scholar, distant from court by choice, writing philosophical treatises on the nature of leadership in a crumbling monastery tower. Another serves in the Navy, commanding with more fire than caution, beloved by sailors, and suspected by diplomats. And then, of course, there is your heir. The child who used to sneak candied almonds into their sleeve during banquets now walks beside you in velvet and steel, mimicking your tone, asking careful questions, and watching, always watching. You see yourself in them, but also something freer, something you hope will outlast you. They have not yet developed the hollow weight behind the eyes. Not yet. And every time you catch a glimpse of their laughter, their unguarded joy at something small and irrelevant. Rain on stone, a clumsy dog, the flick of a bird's wings, you find yourself quietly praying that it never fully fades. Historians still debate when your reign reached its peak. Some say it was the year of 5 decrees, when you resolved a triad of conflicts with a single series of trade laws. Others mark the festival of renewal, when 3 rival kingdoms attended your daughter's wedding and sat at peace under the same colored banners. You don't mark your life by those things. You remember the feel of parchment between your fingers, the smudged ink of treaties you rewrote in the margins, the nights you stared into the hearth trying to decide whether to send troops or bread. You remember the faces of people who begged for mercy, for attention, for help. Some you saved, others you didn't. You carried them all. You no longer believe in the myth of the benevolent king who always does right. You believe in the tired man who does the least harm and hopes it's enough. You no longer flinch at the sound of bad news. It's simply another thread in the tapestry. But you do still flinch when you see a child crying in the presence of authority. That never left you. The court is different now. New voices fill the halls. Your old advisor, Lucian, long since gone, replaced by a younger strategist with sharper edges and a glint in his eye that suggests he's already rehearsed your eulogy. The nobles are polite, but restless. The newer ones were ambition like Cologne, strong, cloying, unmistakable. They praise your wisdom, your reign, your legacy, all while circling like vultures scenting change in the air. The people still cheer your name on feast days, but you sense in their cheers a hollow echo, a tradition more than a conviction. You are, after all, their longest-serving monarch. What they know, not necessarily what they love. You step onto the palace balcony less frequently now, not out of fear but fatigue. You're tired of being seen, of being interpreted, of being royal. You sometimes daydream, not of escape, as you once did, but of shrinking, of fading into the background like an old tapestry, beautiful, ignored, and undisturbed. One evening, after a particularly long council meeting in which 3 factions debated a tax adjustment, so minor it could have been solved by splitting a loaf of bread, you retreat to the royal garden. It's twilight, the air's soft with the smell of earth and lilac, and for a while you simply sit. No crown, no robes, just a man on a bench listening to the wind. A cat appears, half feral, sleek, with a crooked ear, and curls at your feet without ceremony. It does not care who you are. You nearly cry from the sheer relief of it. Later that night, you write in your journal, "It is strange how the world expects the king to be more than a man, when it is the man who suffers all the king cannot." You underline it twice, then fall asleep at your desk, dreaming of waves and empty shores. Rumors of your health begin to circulate. You're not ill, not exactly, but your energy wanes, your hands tremble after long meetings, your knees complain when you kneel during prayers. You begin to withdraw more deliberately, allowing your heir to attend key meetings in your place. Some praise your foresight. Others whisper that you've lost your grip. You don't care. You finally reach the point where legacy matters more than appearance. You want them to remember you as thoughtful, not theatrical, as steady, not stubborn. You meet privately with your successor, not to lecture, but to listen. You tell them things no advisor can. You share the invisible parts of ruling, the ache behind the titles, the loneliness of being right too soon, the impossibility of pleasing everyone, the necessity of knowing when to step back. You will fail, you tell them gently, but failure is not a betrayal. It's part of the crown. Just don't let it harden you. You walk the castle less now, but you do so with greater purpose. You revisit the places of your youth. The stables where you used to hide from tutors. The East Tower where you once fell asleep watching lightning strike over the hills. The servants' corridor where you once eavesdropped on rumors about yourself. Each space greets you like an old companion, changed but recognizable. You speak to fewer people now, but more deeply. You thank the cook who still leaves spiced bread near your chamber. You visit the infirmary and remember the names of the wounded you once spoke to during wartime. You send letters to those who once aided your cause and ask nothing in return. You take less space in rooms and more in memories. And finally, one night, you call for your heir. You are wrapped in a cloak, not royal robes, and you do not sit on the throne. You sit on the edge of your bed, the firelight casting your face in golden shadow. You tell them it is time, not to take the crown, not yet, but to prepare for when you're no longer there to advise. You speak not as a king, but as a tired man who bore a great weight for many years. You share not your victories, but your regrets. You offer no heroic speeches, no tales of glory, only the truth. That power is a burden, that ruling is sacrifice, and that they must carry it differently than you did. Leave space for joy. You say, your voice barely more than air. Leave space for doubt. That's how you stay human. When they leave, you lie back and stare at the ceiling. The fire crackles. Somewhere below, a feast continues in your name. But up here it is quiet. And in that quiet, you feel something unexpected, peace. Not the grand, trumpet-sounding peace of songs and treaties, but the small, soft kind that comes when you know you've done what you could, when you know the wheel will keep turning and someone else is now at the helm. You close your eyes. You're not asleep. Not yet. But you are ready. The palace breathes around you. Its ancient stones warmed by a low-burning hearth as dusk slips into night like ink poured gently across parchment. The shadows stretch farther now, not menacing, just calm, familiar even, as if the walls themselves remember you, their monarch, not just as a name or a crown or a portrait, but as someone who once walked their length barefoot, who once leaned against a cold pillar after a long night of decisions, who once whispered private doubts to the velvet dark. You rise slower these days, each movement an act of memory. There's no one to dress you anymore, not because you lack attendance, but because you've waved them off for the evening, choosing instead the quiet ceremony of pulling a robe across your shoulders alone, the fabric light, worn and comforting. It no longer matters how you appear. What matters now is the weight of the air, the creak of the old wooden floor, the scent of lavender oil rising faintly from your sleeve, reminding you of your mother's hands when she used to rub your temples after a long study session. The crown still sits in its velvet-lined chest across the room, but you haven't worn in days. You're still the king, of course, until your final breath, but the kingdom now knows who walks behind you in shadow, ready to step into light. And more importantly, they know it. You've seen in their posture, in their increasingly confident tone when addressing the council, in the subtle way they started placing their hands behind their back while thinking, just like you used to. It's funny how the little things echo louder than the grand ones. You used to think power lived in decrees and banners and official seals. Now you understand. Real power lives in the soft moments, the ones where no one is watching, but history still leans in to listen. Outside your chamber window, the city is lit in patches, warm windows, torchlit corners, the distant glow of lanterns bobbing along the riverbank like sleepy fireflies. You remember that river as a boy, before you were anything royal, standing on its banks and skipping stones while your tutor yelled for you to return. You wonder, as you often do now, whether that boy would recognize the man you became, whether he'd be proud, whether he'd be afraid. You suspect a bit of both. Sometimes you envy him, that wide-eyed creature of mischief and mud-streaked cheeks. Other times, you pity him. He had no idea what was coming. You stand a while at the window, one hand resting on the sill, the other clutching a small carved figure. Your childhood toy, worn smooth from years of anxious fingers. You've kept it all these decades, tucked in a velvet pouch behind books no one ever reads. Tonight, you brought it out without really thinking, and now it sits in your palm like an old friend, as if to say, "We did all right, didn't we?" In the hall beyond, footsteps approach. You don't flinch. You recognize them. Slow, steady, respectful. Your heir enters quietly, not in royal garb, but in the soft gray robes of a learner. How appropriate. You nod, they bow, and then they sit across from you by the hearth, legs crossed like they used to when they were a child listening to bedtime stories. No taites, no fanfare. Just two people, generations apart, joined by blood and burden. You speak little, mostly sharing silences, until finally they ask the question you always knew would come. What's the one thing you'd change if you could? You think a long while. It's not an easy question. So many things. So many mistakes and triumphs and choices that could have gone either way. You could say less war, or more time with family, or I wish I'd listened more, and all of those would be true. But instead, you answer, I would have forgiven myself sooner. They nod, slowly, the weight of the sentence sinking in like a seed being planted. You hope it grows into something useful. Later, after they've left with a quiet smile and the scent of rosemary trailing behind them, another thing they've adopted from you. You return to your chair and let your body melt into it. The fire crackles, low and steady like your heartbeat. You close your eyes for a moment and allow yourself to drift. Not asleep yet, just drifting into memories that unfold not like a parade, but like a snowfall. Soft, slow, unexpected. You see your coronation again, not as it was recorded, but as you felt it. The roar of the crowd reduced to a hum, the weight of the crown real and metaphorical, the sudden realization that nothing after that moment would ever be yours alone again. You see the faces of those long gone, your queen in younger days, laughing at something you said during a walk through the orchard, your father, silent in the moonlight, placing a hand on your shoulder with the unspoken pressure of legacy. Lucien, forever watching, always 10 steps ahead. They do not speak in these memories. They simply exist beside you, part of the same long river you've been floating down all your life. You rise once more, just to make the journey to your bed, each step deliberate, soft, as if moving through water. The bed, massive and cold earlier in your reign, now feels just right. You sit on the edge and remove the ring from your finger, the signet of your line, worn smooth and warm from decades of use. You place it on the side table, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. You know someone else will wear it soon. Someone you prepared. Someone you trust. You lie back against the pillows, your breath slowing, your limbs folding inward like leaves at dusk. No servants tuck you in. No chamberlain fusses over your posture. Just you, the fire, the silence. Outside, the bells begin to chime midnight. Not for death, not for birth, just the changing of time, the passing of one day into another. You smile softly, eyes closed now, breathing even, steady calm. The kingdom endures. The line continues. And finally, for the first time and longer than you can remember, there is nothing more for you to do. Now, there is only stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand anything from you, that simply wraps around you like a soft wool blanket, worn at the edges, warm from memory. Your breath slows just a little, in and out, the way waves move along a quiet shore, smooth and patient. There's no need to rush. No more decisions waiting in the wings. No names to remember. No titles to uphold. You've done enough. You are enough. The palace can wait. The crown will rest. And you are free at last to let go. Imagine yourself lying beneath the open sky. Cool night air brushing against your cheeks. Stars scattered like diamonds across velvet. The moon hangs heavy and kind, casting a silver path across your skin, like a gentle hand tracing your journey. You feel the earth beneath you, solid and silent, holding you without question. You feel the weight you've carried begin to dissolve. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The long nights, the tight smiles, the endless watching. They melt away into the dark, carried off by the breeze that hums low and steady through the tall grass. There's a fire nearby, just low enough to flicker, just warm enough to remind you that you're safe. The air smells faintly of cedar and old paper and something sweet you can't quite name. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's peace. You sink deeper into it, into that rich, quiet space between wakefulness and dreaming. A space where the world is kind, where you're small again, but in a good way. Just a person, just breath and warmth and stillness. No more thrones, no more pressure, just this. So let your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench. Let the last of the day fall from your fingertips like sand slipping through an hourglass. There's nothing else you need to carry. Not tonight. You're safe. You are home. You're drifting.